Hello, this is Santiago, and welcome to ACE's BP Debate Introduction. This introduction will have four main parts, which are the presentation of who am I, why am I here, what am I doing, and what this guide intends to accomplish. Second is BP structure, how BP debate is structured, and what are its components, what its order, and etc. How it differs from other debate formats such as WSDC, Karl Popper, or any other kind of debate and academic debates you may have been part of. Third are the adjudication criteria, the two main pillars over which BP debate is judged. So, what do you need to do in order to win a debate? And fourth, some other resources which I think could be useful if you're interested in this and in London. So, hi, my name is Santiago Samayoa. I am the current national sub-champion at the last CNDI, which is Campeonato Nacional de Debate Universitario. This was celebrated in San Marcos University. And I'm also the former national champion in the novice category, which is the category destined for people that at the time were less than a year in BP debating. I'm also the former president and coach of my university SODUPC debate club, which is SODUPC. And I am the current academic advisor and coach of said debate club. And, well, now I will be the team leader in ACE's debate event. Fair warning here, this is in no way a comprehensive explanation of BP debate, but instead a brief overview of the most important and general aspects of it. Why? Because BP debate is an over 20-year-old discipline, and the manuals that guide its most important international events, like CEMUDE or UTS, are over 100 pages long. We do not think it's realistic to expect several teams to read all of that. So this guide attempts to summarize it to its core elements. Also, originally, motion statements in BP debating are given only 15 minutes before the start of the debate, and no research is allowed. So no Googling, no ChatGPTing, anything like that. However, in this occasion, the motion statement will be sent around a week before ACE. Why? Because we think this way the debate will be a much more enriching experience for people. This might be their first, second, one of their several first introductions and, yeah, getting close to the debating. So, what is British parliamentary debate? A second, please. This is the structure. I know it's kind of complicated, so let's see it step by step. First, there's a motion statement, which is the theme around which the debate revolves. In this example, this House would forbid zoos. Around this motion statement, there are four teams that compete against each other, which are two governments, opening government and closing government, and two oppositions, which are opening opposition and closing opposition. Each of these teams is comprised of two members. In opening government is the prime minister and the deputy prime minister. In opening opposition would be the leader of opposition, followed by the deputy leader of opposition. In closing government, it would be the member or extension member and the whip member. And in closing opposition would be again the member of opposition or the extension of opposition and the whip opposition. All of this, the members go in that order, and yeah, that's it. Something to clarify here is that governments support the motion statement. So in this case, both opening government and closing government would support what the motion statement states, which would be that they would argue for the forbidding of zoos, while oppositions oppose this. So they would have to argue against the forbidding of zoos. Some important caveats here. Each speaker have 15 minutes to debate with a 15-second grace window. What does that mean? So, Prime Minister comes first. He speaks for 7 minutes and 15, which is the max. Then, Leader of Opposition comes and he speaks for 7 minutes and 15 seconds. Then Deputy PM, then Deputy LO, then Member of Government, then Member of Opposition, then Whip, then Whip. That's the order, and each turn lasts for maximum 7 minutes and 15 seconds. Second caveat, opening and closing teams are not the same team. They want to beat each other. This means that closing teams need not only to just support their opening teams, but to extend the debate, which means to bring something new and proven to be more relevant than their opening counterpart. This is going to be further explained in the next example. However, this is something to be considered. Also, closing teams cannot directly contradict their opening counterparts. This might be kind of confusing with last part. However, I'm going to explain it again better with the following example. Third caveat, rebuttal capacity is important when taking into consideration an argument. This means the weak speakers, which are, again, the last speakers that speak of each side of the debate, cannot bring any new arguments or any new ways to prove their case. They can only bring rebuttals or positionings, which I'm going to explain again, which in the following example. I know I'm saying I'm going to explain a lot in the following example, but I think it's much easier to understand BP debating once you actually understand it in practice and not in theory. This is just basic structure, which I think is obviously necessary to understand how this works. And also, the last important caveat, there's things that are called POIs, which are points of information, which are 15-second windows in which teams can speak in someone else's turn. They have to be granted by the active speaker. So this means that, for example, I am the leader of the opposition and the prime minister is speaking. I can raise my hand, and if and only if prime minister gives me the opportunity to speak, I can have those 15 seconds to speak, to ask, to rebut, to do whatever I want. So let's work an example. In the motion statement, this house would forbid zoos. Let's say opening government argues that zoos should be forbidden because they are inherently horrible for animals. Because these animals need vast spaces and an enriching environment which zoos cannot provide. For example, a lion needs the thrill of the hunt to produce the dopamine that gives them good feeling, and without it, they will be depressed and anxious and sad in this zoos, and that's why we always see pictures and videos of lions or big predators just being sad and depressed in zoos. So this is true, but so what can closing government do now? This is the example. Closing government says forbidding zoos is not only good, morally good, because of what OG previously stated, but it would mean that the money currently invested in the maintenance of zoos would instead be invested on other environmentally responsible measures, such as natural reserves, ecotourism, ecological activism, etc. Who wins between these two, which are both true, non-contradictory, and different? Because, again, closing teams must bring something new to the debate, to new and different than their opening counterpart. So, who wins between these two? It depends on how well their case is proven and how well it is positioned, which is the next part, adjudication criteria. BP is judged mostly on two things. Of course, as previously stated, it is a very complex discipline and yada, 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 yada. However, there are two main pillars of BP, which is how well something is proven and how well something is positioned in comparison to other cases. I'm going to explain this two, one after the other. So, when is something proven to be true? When the logical chain and its components of the final argument are substantiated. It's not enough to just enunciate something, it has to be explained. Again, let's go to last example. Opening government, explain. Zoos should be forbidden because they are inherently horrible for animals, which need vast spaces and an enriched environment that zoos cannot provide. If you analyze this statement, there are several components which have to be explained, which have to be proven, which have to be substantiated. First, for example, is why do animals need vast spaces and an enriching environment? It's not enough to just say, well, they do. It's obvious, which it kind of is, but you have to explain it. Second, why are zoos inherently limited in providing that? Why can zoos be huge and just provide these places? No, they cannot, because they have to be able or accessible to tourism, because they have to be the animals have to be enclosed in small enough spaces in order for the visitors that visit the zoos to have it guaranteed to get a look at these animals. Third, why is forbidding them a good solution? Why isn't there a better solution? For example, I don't know, regulating them, limiting them, making them have better conditions or whatever. Why is forbidding the best or the only solution? So if we read this sounds intuitive. Zoos should be forbidden because they are inherently horrible for animals. It sounds logical, it sounds good. But there are several components in this that need to be explained, need to be substantiated in order to this argument to be proven. That's what we mean by if these questions, the question that emerge when we listen to the main statement being argued, if these questions are answered, then the argument is proved. And second, what happens if both arguments, both governments and oppositions, or both governments are proven? What happens there? Then the second criteria for adjudication comes in handy, which is what is to position something. To position is to compare. It is to answer the question, what is what I am proving more important than when other teams are? Again, let's go to the zoo example. Okay, let's say opening government has done a tremendously good job at saying, yeah, zoos are evil, zoos are bad for the animals, are morally bad. Okay, if that is proven, then let's say closing government comes and says, forbidding zoos would mean that the money currently invested in the maintenance would instead be invested on other environmentally responsible measures, such as natural reserves, ecotourism, all of that. Let's say closing governments also proves, also answer to all the questions that are necessary for it to be proven. Then, assuming both cases are well proven, which is what we just did, why is this case, CG's case, more relevant than opening government's case? Okay, this has to be explicitly said. So, CG comes and says, OG's case is based on reducing suffering. It just limits the suffering that animals are put through when they're put in a zoo. CG, closing government, also increases well-being. Why? Because investing in natural reserves, all of this, not only reduces suffering, reduces harm, but makes these places thrive much more than they would otherwise, and thus increases well-being. And not only that, this benefit extends not only to the animals, which are the only population, let's say, benefited or safeguarded in zoos, but it extends to the entire ecosystem, which is now much more protected. It extends to the plants, it extends to the air quality, the soil quality, the rivers, the water quality, etc. So to position something is to compare why is it better than all the other cases in the debate, both your opening team, if you're the closing, and the opposing teams, whether you are in government or in opposition. Here is something important. Something being proven is a prerequisite of it being positioned. So yeah, you can say both of these things. Like, yeah, okay, it is true that OG's opening government's benefits are only limited to reducing harm. Okay, but but if you don't explain, for example, why the money invested in the maintenance of zoos would necessarily be invested in environmentally responsible measures, then you could just say, okay, this money is just going to be funneled to fracking or oil drilling or something that is entirely unrelated and would not benefit animals at all. So proving the argument is a prerequisite of positioning it. These are some additional resources which I think, are better at explaining certain detailed stuff which I could not explain here because of the limits of time and because of the nature of this guide as something brief and that intends to summarize very core aspects. I'm going to get I'm going to make sure that you have access to these links and to this whole presentation. And I'm also going to leave my contact information in the video or in the message sent to you by Ace so you can make any requests or solve any questions with. That's all. Bye bye.